Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to just give it a minute for folks to settle in, and then we will begin today's meeting. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day, and we really appreciate having you with us. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining. Those of you that have just jumped on, we are so happy to have you here for our Suicide Prevention Coalition quarterly meeting. We have lots of great information to share with you today, and we are just going to give it another moment to settle in, and we will get started. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and we are going to be getting started in just a moment. So nice, so many familiar faces. Okay. Well, it's 9:05, so I think it's a good time to start. Uh, all right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July Riverside County's Suicide Prevention Coalition quarterly meeting. We are very excited to have you here with us today. My name is Rebecca Antion. I am with the Riverside University Health System Public Health Department, and I am co-chair of our county's coalition. So I just, want to share with you that the purpose of these quarterly meetings is really twofold. The first objective is to provide learning, to broaden knowledge and build expertise in suicide prevention best practices among our community. And the second is to share updates regarding suicide prevention efforts that are happening here in Riverside County. So we are just so happy to have you with us today. I'm going to actually turn it over to Mindy McFarland, who's going to share some things with us.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. As she's shared, we're excited to share the content that we have prepared for you. But before we do get started, we'd like to invite you to participate in a quick poll just so that we can learn more about who is in the Zoom room with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and I will launch a poll so we can find out some information about who is in our room. So just what region do you represent? That Western, Mid-County, Desert? Is it countywide? Are you outside of Riverside County? Who do you serve? What best describes your work setting? And for summer fun to stay cool, what would you choose? Would it be the beach, the pool, or please keep me away from water and I prefer indoors with air conditioning? Let's see, since I know today's not really a good day to kind of talk about the heat of summer because it's kind of cool today and this morning, but it'll be heating up soon enough, so we'll see what folks prefer. And so as you join, welcome everyone. We invite you to participate in our poll just to see who's in the Zoom room for us. We'll give it about, let's see, quite a lot of folks participating. So we'll just give it maybe 10, 15 more seconds. Okay. We still got responses coming in. That's great. Okay, so I am going to now, I think, end our poll, and we'll see and share those results to see who's in our room. So we got quite a spread across everywhere. So a lot of folks from Western and county-wide. We have some mid-county, desert, welcome, and also some folks outside of Riverside County. And as far as who we serve, a lot of us serving the Tay population, followed by adults. We have older adults, children. We have quite a spread there too. And let's see how we're represented in our work setting here. We got quite a lot across everywhere, maybe a few that are missing, but that's also what we're striving to do. So if you see that we're missing some folks from different organizations, maybe reach out to them, invite them to participate in our efforts. And then let's see, the most interesting one, for summer fun to stay cool, what would we prefer? Surprisingly, a lot of folks with the beach. I like the beach. Followed by pool, and also an equal split between pool and keep me away from the water. I want to stay indoors with air conditioning. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating in that fun little poll. And we're going to move along for today and talk about what our agenda is going to be. So we're going to do a Suicide Prevention Coalition overview, and then followed by means data in Riverside County presented by Jenny Duong. We have the presentation from Stan Collins today on means safety. We'll also have time for Q&A, and we'll also have updates from our intervention subcommittee, followed by some closing announcements for today. And we'd like to start by providing a quick overview of our coalition. But before we do that, we want to also talk about reviewing our beliefs that we have in our coalition about suicide prevention. So we believe that suicide is often preventable with the right knowledge and skills, and we also believe that everyone can play a role in suicide prevention regardless of background or experience. And the Riverside County Suicide Prevention Coalition's mission and vision statement is working collaboratively in Riverside County to eliminate suicide deaths and suicide attempts and increase resources and supports. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca to overview our coalition.
Thanks, Mindy. Okay, so now just like to share a little bit about the structure of our coalition for those that are new to our meeting. Our coalition consists of a leadership team representing Riverside University Health System from both behavioral health and public health departments. Our coalition also consists of 8 subcommittees that meet monthly to help advance our goals outlined in the county strategic plan for suicide prevention, which is titled Building Hope and Resiliency. And this strategic plan was established in 2020. To learn more about our county's strategic plan and our 8 subcommittees, please visit the coalition's website. I think if we move along to the next slide. And we can give you more information on how to sign up and any type of subcommittees that you may want to be a part of. So our website is www.rivco.org. So we hope that you will check it out. And what you're seeing right now is the layout of the structure of our coalition. It's just a 1-page quick reference tool. This is really kind of like our Cliff Notes version of the plan. So just have it here organized in a way that falls along the suicidal crisis path. The suicidal crisis path is a model that intends to integrate multiple theoretical approaches and frameworks within the context of an individual suicide experience. So in doing so, the purpose is to match intervention approaches with the timing, factors and protective factors that would be mechanisms to prevent a suicide from occurring. So this diagram here, it's been taken from our colleagues over at Fresno County. They originally developed the suicidal crisis path, and it's one that we've adopted as well. So really what this means is it's just a different way of kind of looking at our strategies, and it's multi-layered approach that includes the 3 levels of intervention, and it also includes the Suicide Prevention Resource Centers framework. So 3 levels of intervention is universal, referring to approaches designed for an entire population. Then we have selective approaches for targeting 1 or more subgroups of a population. And then indicated is really referring to when interventions are aimed at individuals who are showing signs of suicide ideation or behavior. So just a quick reference for you all to get an understanding of how it's been structured. Again, really excited to share all this with you, and we want, hopefully, we'll visit our coalition website and you can read more about it. So as we move along, I would like to introduce our first speaker. And the first speaker that we have is Jenny Duong. And she is with our Riverside University Health System Public Health Department. Jenny is an epidemiologist in the department, and she is going to be sharing some information on data that we've collected here in regarding death by suicide and means or methods. So Jenny, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Jenny Duong. I'm an epidemiologist with Riverside University Health System Public Health. So today I'm going to be talking to you about death by suicide of Riverside County residents. And then we're going to really drill into the means, and especially with today's theme of firearm deaths. So thank you. Next slide, please. So the key takeaway things that I want to discuss today is the overall climate of death by suicide from 2020 through 2024. Then we're going to go into looking at the death rates by the race and ethnicity. And then we're also going to be looking at death rates by age group, sex, and region. Next slide, please. So what you're looking at is just the total overall number of deaths by suicide per year from 2020 to 2024. Years 2023 and 2024 is still preliminary, so that means that the death numbers for these years are not complete and final yet. But out of all of the deaths that you've seen or that it happened in the county, total deaths by suicide alone is 1,325. And this is all 5 years. But if we're looking at 2023 to 2024, by having 30 extra deaths, that shows that there's a 12% increase in deaths from 2023 to 2024. And then out of the 1,325 deaths, 566 of deaths, or 42%, is strictly by firearms. And so next slide, please. And then from here, we want to look at how does firearms really take into consideration when we're talking about all suicide deaths. So then by means and then broken down by race and ethnicity, we have that on the right side, we have an overall rank of firearms being number 1, number 2 is suffocation, followed by poisoning, falling, cut or pierce, drowning, and other. And then the graph on the left will show you the same rank from left to right if you're reading from left to right. So then we are seeing that majority of the deaths are percentage-wise is happening towards our white population, followed by Black population, and then Asian and Hispanic. We do have other race and ethnicity groups. However, some of our data for these groups are very low, so it is not statistically stable for us to be providing that data today. Next slide, please. Now, since we're looking at death by firearms, we're going to be looking at the age-adjusted death rate by race ethnicity for the 5 years. So then through this graph, it's a little cut off, but it's all right. But through this graph, we're seeing that overall firearm death rates have decreased among our Black population. So then if we're following the green line or the second to top line on the graph, you could see that from 2020 down to 2024, it's like a slow and gradual decrease, which is great. But then if we're looking at all racial groups entirely, from 2020 to 2024, there is a gradual increase in deaths through 2024. And our white population and our Asian population, we can see that there's a peak at 2022, and then it dips down in 2023, and then kind of come back up in 2024. However, in 2024, the rate is not as high as it was in 2022. So next slide, please. And now that, since we're continuing with death by firearms, we're looking at age groups, and we have split it up by the behavioral health age groupings. So 10 to 15, 16 to 24, 25 to 59, and 60 plus. And based on the rate of our population, it seems that our highest death rate are individuals in the 60 plus age group, and then followed second by our individuals aged 25 through 59. And then again, with our smaller count data, the rates for those aged 10 to 15 is quite small, so that rate is statistically unstable at this point. And all of this data is including the preliminary data of 2023 and 2024. And next slide, please. Continuing with death by firearms, we are splitting up the rates now by sex, so males and females. And we can see that each year males are disproportionately affected by firearms compared to females year over year. So something to think about when we're looking at interventions geared towards sex, geared towards age groups, geared towards race ethnicity that we've seen previously in the past few slides. And next slide, please. And then lastly, I wanted to share with you the death rate by firearms by region. And based on the information that we have, it seems that Northwest region accounts for the highest rate of deaths in the combined 5 years, followed by the Southwest region. And then again, with the counts being low for our 5 years, the East region is statistically unstable and should be interpreted with caution at this point. And that is my very brief presentation. Thank you all for being here today. If you have questions, please share them with the group or send me a message and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing that information. Really very helpful in kind of setting the tone and giving us some context as we move into bringing on our next presenter. So for that, I would like to welcome Stan Collins, who will be presenting today on Maine safety. Stan is an advocate who has devoted his life to helping others stay alive. He has worked in the field of suicide prevention for over 20 years and currently works as a consultant providing technical assistance in the creation and implementation of suicide prevention curricula and strategies. Stan has a passion for youth-focused suicide prevention and is the co-founder of the Directing Change program and film contest. So I would like to welcome Stan to share his presentation.
All right. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Great. So you got the slides already set up. Perfect. So nice to see everybody. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces. Some of you may have heard about me talk about this topic in the past, maybe not at this level of detail. I know I've done a lot of work with, I think we have quite a few schools folks as well. So we did a lot of work through RCOE over the last few months, but really, when it comes to suicide prevention, and thanks, Rebecca, for that nice introduction. The reason why one of my passions around, this topic is focused on mean safety, as you're going to see, is just there's so much data to show that if there's, kind of one thing that we could do, this is one of the things we should focus our energy on, if we can just put that time and space. So I'm going to share some research. I'm also going to share a little bit of, I don't know, just kind of anecdotal evidence to kind of help you frame. But what I'm hoping you're going to walk away with, I guess, would be my goal is if you're not familiar with this topic, to be able to, understand it first and foremost, but also be able to talk to someone else about it, about why is mean safety matter? Why is reducing access to lethal means important? And why should it be a strategy? And why is it a strategy, as identified earlier with your coalition, with your strategy? So with that, I think we're gonna, please go ahead and type in questions. I'll try to keep the chat open, but I think there's something really pertinent. I'm not sure, Mindy or Rebecca, who's monitoring chat. If there's something like really burning, feel free to stop me and be like, hey, no, we should do this now. Otherwise, I think we're just gonna have some Q&A discussion at the end. Is that accurate? Okay, cool. So next slide. So as with any time we talk about suicide, as we, anytime we come together on this topic, but especially I think when it comes to mean safety, because while I will do my best to avoid any activating content, there is certain stuff that around mean safety that can be a little bit more activating for folks. So even if you're doing good right now, if something comes up, or maybe you're not doing good right now, and you're like, you know what, I don't think I can do this topic today, because it is a little bit more focused of an area of it. Just please take care of yourself. I'm a loss survivor. I've had lived experience as well around this topic, as I'm sure many of us in this room are. And again, I won't take any disrespect if I think we record this. So if you need to come back and watch it later, or, just want to throw that out there. Please take care of yourself. All right, next slide. So one of the things I'm really proud of, and I'm happy to share with you today, is through previous funding from a different source, I was given the opportunity to create a mean safety website that we'll be referencing throughout the day today. It's called strivingforsafety.org. And as I mentioned, we'll kind of review it, but it's a forward facing. So one of the first mean safety lethal means reductions for suicide prevention websites that is intended for the general public. I'm going to share with you some other resources that are out there, but most of them are for professionals and clinicians. This one was really created so that the average person can walk in knowing nothing, whether they're concerned for themselves or concerned for someone they care about, and say, okay, what does mean safety even mean? What do I need to do? What is step one? So we'll go through the different pockets of it, but I would really encourage you at some point to check it out. We're going to continue to update it. We have the funding expired for that project, so we have full ownership over the website now, which is actually kind of nice because we can do whatever we want with it, with respect. But please do check that out. But we'll be referencing that as we go. All right, next slide. So we're going to start with just a little bit of general background on what is mean safety, why mean safety, and then we'll move into different pockets of research related to the various, the primary means related to suicide in Riverside County and just in general. So next slide. So in addition to the resource of striving for safety, if this is a very new topic for you or something you'd like to learn more about and understand to be able to, just talk about it in in your professional lives or just, be able to describe why does this matter? I would really encourage you to check out this website. It's from the Harvard School of Public Health, and it was one of the first kind of entities that really brought means safety to the forefront. Previously, the very first national strategy had kind of mentioned it, but the updated version really highlighted it, and the current version, which we'll talk about in a second, really emphasizes along with our state strategy. So I credit means the people behind the Means Matter um, effort and the School of Public Health at Harvard with really bringing means safety to the forefront. Um, meansmatter.org, it's a simple website to remember. I think someone asked already, are you going to share the slides with us? Yeah, I'm happy to share these slides with you. I will ask that you don't go and take them and run with them, but I definitely want you to have this information. So one of the beautiful things about this website is it really does a good job of collating all the research out there that has been kind of putting mean safety at the forefront. So if you want to learn about mean safety in general, some of almost every resource or research study I'm going to mention today, you can find on this website. If you want to find out more research on a specific topic related to mean safety, if you want to look at mean safety across cultures or across nations and why this has worked, this is a great place. So it's just really well organized, really well collated. And again, if you really want to, kind of nerd out, like I am passionate about this topic, I really would encourage you to check out this website. All right, next slide, please. All right. As you might have heard me talk about this before, you may have just been exposed to this, but one of the things, and that's why I love that, as Rebecca was talking about with your strategy, and I guess I should disclaimer that I was part of that team, so I can't just, tout it as amazing. But you guys did a great job with it, is that the use of the suicidal risk curve. And the reason for that is, as Rebecca mentioned, it combines a lot of theories related to suicidality. And one of the things I think that it helps to dispel is that suicide is just this static thing. It's a switch that is either on or it's off. And if it's off, you have nothing to worry about. But if it's on, it's 100% a crisis. And as you saw with that, it's really more of a spectrum. As we know from our personal experiences, it's more of a spectrum, right? It's some days are worse than others. Once the switch is quote unquote on, it's not always up here in the red. Sometimes it's still, just in the yellow or the orange. So to look at suicide as this fluctuating, non-static, kind of condition. One of the reasons I don't like the word suicidal is simply because of that idea that suicidal sounds on or off. It also kind of encapsulates somebody's entire existence. If you're suicidal, that's your whole being. You are in crisis 100% of the time, and that's just not reality. People who, while it's, grammatically correct, I prefer the term people experiencing thoughts of suicide, people experiencing suicidality. And the reason for that is just that to understand these fluctuations on the day to day. That when you talk to folks who have experienced suicide for weeks, for months, for years, a lot of the times they're not in crisis. I think we really need to do a better job of understanding suicide distress versus suicide crisis. Anyone who's experiencing thoughts of suicide is obviously, in some level of distress, but not every issue related to suicide is a crisis. And I think that's also important with how we allocate our resources. That Dr. Kelly Posner, who created the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, she said that, if everybody's on high alert, then nobody's on high alert. And I really respect that we have a finite number of resources, we have a finite number of beds and hospitals and people that can screen or people that can assess. We really need to change how the system is working. So I'll get off my soapbox there a little bit, but I think that's an important kind of grounding for everything we're going to talk about today. So with that, Dr. Stanley M. Brown, who created the Suicide Safety Plan, which is kind of the gold standard of safety plans, they introduced this idea of what's called the suicide risk curve. And this is really identifying that, we talked about distress versus crisis, and there absolutely are times when people who are in distress elevate to crisis. But that time period has actually been shown to be relatively low. I'm not sure if you all heard about this or if you remember, but a few years ago, the CDC came out with a report where they interviewed suicide attempt survivors. And they asked them, from the moment you decided to end your life, how long was it until you actually made your attempt? And a lot of times it was, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And what a lot of people took away from that was actually the opposite of what I believe they should have taken away from it. Because the way that it was framed, and I guess I should be careful about knocking the CDC, but the way they messaged it was, okay, so that means that somebody decides to attempt suicide, and within 30 minutes to an hour they're making that attempt. What they didn't clarify really, and what a lot of people missed, was that that doesn't mean it was the first time they thought about suicide. It's not like life was going fine. They tripped, they had a bad day, and within an hour they were making a suicide attempt. The people you've worked with, the people you know, the people you love have experienced, they were up and down. They were in suicide distress for a while, like the suicide crisis passed, and they had that elevating event. They had that precipitating event. So the question really should have been, from that precipitating event, having already experienced suicide, how long was it to that period of time? And I think that's an important clarification, because if we took it on paper for what a lot of people took that for, we wouldn't even be bothering with suicide prevention. If people went from 0 to 60 within 30 to 60 minutes, suicide prevention wouldn't even be a thing. It would just happen, and the numbers would be extremely higher. Again, the clarification is that people who are experiencing suicide distress had a precipitating event. They had likely already had a plan. They likely already had these thoughts. Well, they definitely already had these thoughts. They almost certainly had a plan. And more importantly, as we're going to talk about, they also probably had access to those means. But that period of time when someone is in that distress period, that 30 to 90 minutes that they ask these folks about, is really what defines the suicide risk curve. And what that is the period of time where people are capable of suicide. And this is a really important word. Thomas Joyner talks about it in his theory of suicide and interpersonal theory of suicide. And what it is that when we look at the data, we know how many people die by suicide. We have a rough number of how many people attempt suicide. But when you think about the idea that the estimates are in about 10 million plus range of Americans who think about suicide every year, I'm going to try to be careful with this. Of 10 million people, that we have 50-ish thousand suicides in our country every year, shows us that not everybody who thinks about suicide is going to die, obviously not going to die by suicide. In fact, majority of those people aren't even going to attempt suicide. And the suicide risk curve speaks to this space where people are capable. It's one thing to have these thoughts, but it's a whole nother to be capable of acting on those thoughts. And I'm going to share with you an analogy. I tried sharing it at the last training I did. I think it made sense, so I'm going to try it here. Um, so that idea of capability, when we talk about messaging, um, is, it's important, because on the opposite side of capability, there's capability to do positive things. You know somebody who works in a field, you know somebody who's an astronaut or a nurse or a doctor or a professional athlete. Some people call it nepotism. I think it's actually being like, oh no, I could be a movie star. My dad's a movie star. Or I could be a doctor. My dad's a doctor. I can be a lawyer because I saw some guy on TV who looks like me who's a lawyer. In the same way that makes you more capable for positive experiences, being exposed, or having access to means, there's a lot of things that make us more capable to follow through on those thoughts. So all that being said, what we do know is that the suicide risk curve, this time of not distress, but actual crisis, typically lasts 30 to 90 minutes. And for anybody who's been a support system, that person that is on the phone or in the room holding somebody, you've seen it. You have a friend call you in the middle of the night and they can't breathe and they can't talk and they just don't want to be here anymore. and you sit with them, whether in silence or in their tears or while you talk through it, and within 30 minutes to an hour, they're like, okay, I think I'm ready to go to sleep. Okay, well, I'm gonna, I'm gonna get some rest, whatever it is. For those of you who work in schools, you've had a student come into your office completely overwhelmed, and within half an hour, 45 minutes, they're saying, hey, I'm ready to go back to class. And so one of the important things when it comes to mean safety is understanding this risk curve, to understand that it's not always completely putting people in a box and keeping them safe. It's about building a safe environment, but most importantly, it's about recognizing and understanding when these moments of crisis are going to happen, and that we don't need to stand vigil or um, be present all the time. There's ways to keep us safe, and there's ways to keep other people safe. But typically, even for somebody who for months, for years, has experienced suicidality, that when they're actually capable, when they're in those moments of crisis, those time periods last anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. Now, what we do know is that the risk is greatest when those thoughts happen more frequently, when people are in the red more often, when they last longer. And typically they last longer when it feels less controllable, when they had never done a safety plan, they haven't seeked therapy, they haven't seeked, mental health supports. Um, when there's few deterrents, fewer reasons for living is a core part of modern suicide prevention. But most importantly, when emotional or psych pain is the reason for the thoughts of suicide or moving forward on those thoughts. And that's a big part of what we miss, which is a whole nother thing that I could spend an hour and a half on. Just understanding that pain is typically the driving force for suicide. It's not this, or it's not the breakup, it's not the job loss, it's not the bullying, it's the emotional pain. But when all those factors are collected, especially when pain and reducing the pain, stopping the pain is the driving force. But ultimately, for our conversation today, understanding capability and understanding that there's a short period of time is hugely important to understanding mean safety. So, with that, I hope everybody's still with me. I know I just did a diatribe and cool. All right. So, all right, next slide, please. All right. So, a few other principles to build onto that component of why mean safety. What is mean safety? And in case I didn't clarify yet, what it means safety is the kind of it's still jargon, but within the suicide prevention community, it's kind of the agreed upon term for the moment for reducing what used to be called reducing access or restricting access to lethal means. We just qualified under means safety. I would argue the suicide prevention field in general needs to find a better term. So if anybody has suggestions, I would love for that to happen because it's very jargony, and people, like even people I know who know I work in suicide prevention, when I talk about it, they're like, wait, means safety means what? Means what? So I like methods, I like mechanisms is a term I use a lot, but collectively as a field, means safety is the agreed upon term. So with that, a lot of times people think when it comes to actual means and methods, and this is why it's so important in the screening phase or the assessment phase to ask about what is the actual mean? What is the mechanism? What is the, as Dr. Mike Inessis, who's done a ton of great work in this field or in this space, calls it, what is your suicide image? When someone moves from, I don't want to be alive anymore, or I think I don't want to be alive, to I'm actively having thoughts of ending my life, they start to draw a picture in their mind. What does suicide look like for me? And as we'll get into, there's different means and methods, as I'm sure you're aware. And depending on how detailed that picture is, depending on how drawn out that picture is, that helps us to determine a risk level. Because somebody who says, well, I know I don't want to be alive, but I've never thought about it, obviously that's why that risk is lower. But in that screening process and in that assessment, component, being able to identify how developed is that image? How thought out is this process? But when it comes to different means and methods, a lot of times we assume that someone who chooses a more lethal mean, which we'll get into, and as you see on the screen, whether it be firearms or, a fall, a lot of times we assume that that person has a greater intent than a person who maybe chooses overdose. And this is data I don't normally share, so I'm sharing it with you as the coalition so you have it as research. I would really encourage you not to share any of the data on this slide, well, at least the bullets 2 and 3, publicly. Um, but firearms are extremely lethal, as many of you know or already assumed. The flip side of it, though, is that the majority of suicide attempts come from overdose or come from cutting and piercing. So a lot of times people will dismiss a suicide attempt, especially among youth. Oh, well, they were just seeking attention because they chose a less lethal method. So firearms are, lethal 85 to 95% of the time. Very few people choose to attempt suicide by firearm, but those who choose to attempt that with that mechanism end up oftentimes dying by suicide. Whereas the majority of people actually attempt using overdose or cutting and piercing, when in reality, there's very low levels of lethality when it comes to that, which is great news, right? Because that means that person survives for another day. Um, but the issue is when we dismiss the intent or the level of intent, the level of capability in somebody who makes an attempt using pills, or cutting and piercing, versus the level of intent that somebody with a firearm. Because if somebody used a firearm, they really were sure of this. There was a determination to this, and that really just isn't the case. It really goes back to our comfort levels. It goes back to um, that suicide image. That's why we see that I would argue, and a lot of people suggest that's why we see higher rates of suicide in the military and higher rates of suicide in first responders, especially law enforcement. It's not that they have a greater intent, it's that they have a greater, for lack of a better word, comfort or capability with a more lethal mean. So it's not that there's something wrong with military veterans or with cops when it comes to suicide. It's just they have a greater comfort and therefore greater capability with a more lethal means. So it's understanding these nuances of it, but I guess most importantly, not dismissing that intent is a huge part of this that often gets dismissed. I've talked with kids who have made an attempt using an overdose, and I apologize again. This is kind of the activating content. I should have given another warning to this section of it, but who have overdosed and woken up the next morning and they felt fine and their parents didn't know, and so nobody ever finds out about it. And so they don't get the after support. They've had this huge traumatic experience, and yet they never get the level of support that somebody that's been through that deserves. So just understanding that intent does not determine the mean or the method is really important. Going down from there to the more positive news that I want to share is that a lot of times we kind of think of uh, a suicide attempt as a scarlet letter. That once you make an attempt, you will have thoughts of suicide for the rest of your life. And while some attempt survivors will argue that yeah, once you've opened that door, you've created a level of capability that will always exist. The reality is that 90% of people who attempt suicide and have a non-lethal attempt will not go on to die by suicide. That will not be the cause of their death. And that's really important for us to understand that no, if we can get somebody to have, of course, we don't want them to attempt, but if we can at least reduce the level of the lethality for that attempt, there's a 90% chance they're not going to die by suicide. That's really good news. And even more so, even more positive than that, 70% of people who make an attempt will not go on to ever attempt again, which I think is equally important. That a lot of times, and you hear this from attempt survivors all the time, especially the more prominent ones that are out there speaking, that as soon as they took that first step in that attempt, they wish they hadn't. They had changed their minds. There's something called like post-traumatic growth, or this reflection that can come from it. So I think this goes back to messaging a little bit. I think we need more people being willing to talk about attempts. We need to clarify the language on attempts, what it means to make an attempt, and understand that an attempt doesn't have to be lethal for it to be a justified attempt. Once somebody takes that first pill, once they take that first step, once they hop over the railing, um, once they pick up that item, that weapon, that is considered an attempt. And we need to be more willing to talk, because I think if we did, there's a lot more people in this country and around the world who would be willing to identify as suicide attempt survivors so that we can normalize it to some degree. Or at least to understand that it's a very common life experience for people to get to that point. Um, Now, one of the other things that we're going to talk about more in a second is, won't people just find another way? But lack of substitution. So moving, once you've created that image, once you've drawn that picture in your mind, most people don't switch from this to that. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but that's what that last bullet point is. I'm going to pause for 1 second and see, Rebecca, Mindy, is there anything like vital we need to cover at the second? Or we can wait on it?
Um, yeah, I think we're okay. Um, we did have someone in the chat just share that they had an active duty person attempt suicide by overdose on pills. They woke up on Sunday, then went to work on Monday and never talked about it until they were in therapy a few years later. So they just kind of shared their story.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that story. And yeah, it happens a lot. And again, that's the most dangerous situation. So after an attempt, we also know that, after an attempt is one of the most crucial times for support. That's why when we work with that's why bringing mean safety in a healthcare setting to behavioral health is so important, because once somebody has made an attempt, that's oftentimes that 6 months afterwards is when they're equally, or if not, more capable. So getting that follow-up care was so when people, whether they're active duty, whether they're a youth, make that attempt and it's not effective, or not lethal, that's really when we need to bring in the most amount of support. So when people live through an attempt and they don't get that support, it can be a really dangerous combination. And that's why, again, we need to talk more about mean safety. We need to normalize these conversations about mean safety. And I think across the board, even though mean safety, and I say this with as much respect as possible, even though mean safety has been shown to be evidence-based and the most researched effective way to prevent and reduce suicide deaths, I would say across the board, from schools to healthcare to behavioral health, it is one of the least like one of the lowest skill sets that we see in the field of suicide prevention, of people being willing to talk about it. And that, I don't mean that as a knock. I mean, I know really good people who are really good at their jobs that are just not comfortable having this conversation, but it needs to be an important part, which I guess is probably why they brought me here today to talk about it. So, all right, next slide, we'll move on to, um, again, I would really encourage you to go to that meansmatters.org website. Um, just the effectiveness of reducing access to lethal means, the lack of substitution. So again, switching from one thing to another, from this mechanism to that mechanism, uh, has been replicated not just here in this country, but across the world. Um, again, this is going to be kind of activating, but a lot of times we think that if we take away access to this, if we take away the guns, they're going to go to the bridge. If we put a barrier on the bridge, they're going to get the pills. Well, if we take away the pills, they're going to do this, and we kind of kick the can down the road. But across the world, there's been numerous studies that show that that's actually not the case. If you reduce access to the leading cause of suicide, what most often happens is that suicides overall go down. Not just suicides using that means, but suicides overall go down. Well, we'll talk more about that. But this is more of just really emphasizing that there's a lot of research to show this, to push back against this idea of substitution, but also to push back against this idea, oh, well, this is just to this one specific spot. This is one of the core components of mean safety research and the International Association for Suicide Prevention, that all agree that if we can reduce access to means, we can save lives. So moving on to the next slide.
And Stan, there was another question here. Would you consider intent being similar to impulsivity?
I would say it's correlated to impulsivity, but I would actually, I guess I would answer it this way. The easy answer, the simple answer, the overly simple answer is that intent and impulsivity are actually inverted. That the more intent somebody has, the less impulsivity they have. I would actually say they're highly correlated. Where the greater intent somebody has, the greater the risk for them being impulsive with their suicide attempt. So it kind of goes back to that idea of the CDC report where they made it sound very impulsive, when in reality, the level of intent that was already present allowed for that impulsivity. Because most people, if this is the first time they've ever had these thoughts ending their life, they're not going to go again from 0 to 60. That intent, that wish for death, that wish to not be alive, probably already existed. So I guess that would be a better way to say it, is that um, while most people mix, put intent and impulsivity at other opposite ends of the spectrum, I think they're actually highly correlated. If that, I don't even know if that made sense. But
No.
I got one person nodded in the audience, so I'll take that as
Okay. And we did have one other question here. So based on the Columbia tool today, brandishing a gun with suicide thoughts is an attempt.
so technically yes. So the first step, picking up the means, picking up the method. And now that one's a little bit tricky. Maybe I was a little bit too loose with my words. It could be considered an attempt if it was the act of, when you use the word brandishing, picking up the firearm with the intent of using the firearm would be considered an attempt. Um, but it could also be rehearsal behavior or preparatory behavior, which also increases capability. So maybe they're not picking it up to use it. If they're picking it up to just become familiar with it, that would be more in line with like rehearsal, what we call rehearsal or preparatory behavior. So just the act of picking it up, it really depends on the intent. Did they pick it up with the idea of, if I pick this up, I'm going to use it, or did they pick it up to familiarize themselves with it? Similar with what other types of weapons, similar with pills. Um, so I hope that makes sense. I think the more clear example of like when an attempt begins is probably when it comes to, say, using pills, like in the bubble wrap, or the not bubble wrap, bubble packaging. Once that first pill is popped out, and once that first pill is swallowed, if they do that with the intent of taking the rest of the pills, that would be considered a suicide attempt. If they only took the package out and held the pill so that they could look at it and understand it, that would be rehearsal behavior. So it is a little bit nuanced. It really depends on what was the intent right before that first act. Because if they picked up that gun expecting to use it, but then they decided not to, or somebody walked in, or somebody called them, that could either be an interrupted or an aborted attempt. So it really depends on what was their intent prior to that first action, if that makes sense. Um, and again, it's all about time and space, and we'll talk more about that as we go. But I'll circle back to that bubble packaging and some of the other acts related to it. But great question so far. And it looks like most people are still here, so it looks like I'm not boring everybody completely with this topic. So thanks for sticking around. All right, so let's go back to this idea of, won't people find another way? This is the biggest pushback against means safety, reducing access to lethal means. Again, they say, apologize for the activation, but if I take away the gun, they're going to go to the bridge. If we put a barrier on the bridge, they're going to get the pills. If we protect the pills, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And we push this idea down the road. And as I've mentioned a few times now, people have what is typically called a suicide image, or by Dr. Mike Nessis it is. And it's kind of a dark place, and we're not going to go and like do a survey about this. But if we were to go around this room and say, if you were going to attempt suicide, which ways would you use and which ways would you absolutely not use? Which mechanisms would be on your list and which would absolutely be not on your list? That list would be different for every single person. There might be similarities, but the ordering of those items would be different. And so understanding that some people who would utilize this mechanism would never use some of these other mechanisms. And I think the mentality, and I think this is why we ended up putting so many people in the hospital in the past. We always pressed the red button because we thought we need to put them in a box. We'll talk about it later, but even in controlled settings like hospitals or prisons or jails, or mental health, support institutions, rehab centers, it's very hard to create a completely safe box. But I think we did that because we thought we just need to put them in a box and keep them safe. But if we sit down and we talk with people and we say, which mechanisms would you use? We can identify that they would do this, but they wouldn't do that. And so what that does is it helps us to narrow the lane of where we need to focus our energy on means safety. Again, it goes back to that capability. Someone who's never touched a firearm is very unlikely to use a firearm in a suicide attempt. Someone who's very comfortable and has multiple firearms is much more likely to use a firearm in a suicide attempt. So having these conversations and understanding that people are typically tied to a meter method, that substitution doesn't happen. Again, that if you reduce suicides, if you reduce access to one method or the leading method of suicides, not just suicides using that method overall or using that method specifically, but suicides overall went down. And going back to some of those studies that were on the previous slide, like there was a country where they used a lot of the gas in the home for their suicides. And so what they did is they changed the chemical composition of the gas that was being delivered to the homes. And people said, okay, well, yeah, obviously suicides using that mechanism will go down, but suicides overall are just going to stay the same. And what they found is that suicides overall went down. There was packaging in for a medication in the UK where there was a certain medication that was being used in a high number of suicides. And so what they did is they did a couple things. They changed the packaging and they changed the prescription. So instead of being a 3-month prescription, people got a 3-week prescription. And I'm just throwing out numbers here. I don't know that it's actually that, so don't hold me to it. But what that meant is that every three weeks instead of 3 months, that person had to be seen by a medical professional. And even though we often kind of dismiss pharmacists as medical professionals, um, they're the most accessible form of medical professionals. And I've done a lot of work in the pharmacy community. But going back to the story, every 3 weeks they had to be seen by a medical professional. The other part of it is that they changed the packaging. So rather than being a bottle of pills, it came in the blister pack. Um, and so when it comes to the blister pack, a lot of people think, well, what's the difference between a blister pack with 100 pills and a bottle, with 100 pills in it? And again, another kind of activating thought that I want you to, process is how many actions does it take to attempt suicide using 100 pills in a bottle? You unscrew the cap, you pour them in your hand, you swallow the pills. It's 3 actions. How many actions does it take to attempt suicide using 100 pills in a blister pack? It's 100. It's 97 more actions, right? It's 100 individual actions of popping out the pills. And while it's not necessarily a physical deterrent, it certainly is a mental deterrent. That means that there's 97 more times where I consciously have to take a step towards suicide. Whereas with the pill, a bottle of pills, or with a firearm, there's very few actions that are necessitated in me making that attempt. And even more so, there is a little bit of a physical barrier. I know someone very well who had a family member that they care about deeply that was actually saved because of the blister pack, because they didn't pop the pills out ahead of time. By the time they got to pill 4 or 5, that would have been lethal. Pills 1 and 2 already kicked in and put them to sleep. So they passed out because they didn't have that level of medication in their body. So all that to say, these people are not these people, us people, all of us who experience these thoughts are tied to a certain mechanism or a certain means. Maybe we'll have, option 1 and option 2, but after that, the risk really subsides. Also, when people do substitute, oftentimes they're substituting away from the most lethal means. So if we can take away the firearm, like I said, if we can reduce access to the firearm, if and they choose, any of the other means, really, the lethality has a huge drop off. So that's another important part of it. But again, there's tons of evidence, tons of research to suggest that people will not substitute means. If they do substitute means, they're going to go to a much less lethal mechanism. That's a really important part of means safety and why these conversations are important. So, all right, next slide, please. All right, so all that I dropped a bunch of research and I kind of soapbox for a while and nerded out with you. But bottom line, like, what does this come back to? Like, what do we need? What do I want you to walk away from with? Is that there are things that we can do to make people safer from suicide. The more time and space, the more speed bumps. It doesn't even need to be a wall. Sometimes a speed bump is going to be effective enough. We can put the person in a safer environment. I would also argue, or we can make their environment safer. Again, hospital settings are not always as safe as people assume that they are. Even, and that's not a knock on healthcare people. It's just very hard to make someone safe in that box. What we can do though is make their environment safer. And we can do that by putting a barrier. So again, just use the example of firearms. This could be a gun safe. These could be gun locks. This could be, you know, putting pills. I think a lot of times when we're talking to folks about mean safety, we forget that safes and gun locks, gun safes can be used for medications as well, or other forms of weapons. Uh, Creating time and space, helping to reduce it. You know, going back to this example of firearms, a lot of times, and I do a ton of work in the firearm community, and we're going to dive into that deeper here in a second. But a lot of times people say, well, what's the point if I'm the one who knows the combo to the gun lock, and I'm the one who, or the gun safe, and I'm the one with the key to the gun lock, but I'm also the person with the ammunition? What good are all those steps if I have access to all those things? Well, going back to that idea of the blister pack. Well, now instead of opening your drawer, pulling out a firearm, you have to go to your gun safe. You have to enter the combination. Then you have to get the key. You have to unlock the lock. Then you have to get the ammo and you have to load the firearm. So each of those is one of those speed bumps. Each one of those is that opportunity for that instinct for self-preservation, for us to come in. Each one of those is another second that ticks by where that 30 to 90 minute suicide risk curve can help us to reduce that pain enough that maybe instead of finishing that last step, we call a friend or we contact a hotline or somebody comes home. We have something that distracts us. Our cat walks in, our dog walks by, and we find a reason for living. There's a lot of different reasons that creating that time and that space can be so effective. And then again, as much as possible, just reducing access to the most lethal or making means less lethal. And we'll talk more about that as we go. All right. Any questions? Everybody still with me? Okay, cool. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so while I mentioned the California state strategy earlier, I did want to point everybody's attention. I'm not sure if this is something that's been brought up much in this group, but the national strategy was updated as of 2024, and I really like the new version. Every time they do it, it gets better and better. One of the things I found interesting, though, is I found that the new national strategy is very similar to our state strategy. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the key elements under Objective 3 in the national strategy, which is focused on reducing access to lethal means. So it talks about training community members in effective ways to reduce. So again, if you work in a school setting, you work in a community-based organization, if behavioral health, healthcare, anybody who is having conversations or doing screenings or assessments with somebody should also be willing and able and capable of having a conversation about mean safety, how to reduce access to the most lethal means. Looking at time and space, what are the policies you have? What are the supports and resources you can use to do that? And just looking at mean safety as a more comprehensive element of our suicide prevention efforts, that we can't wait for the healthcare providers or the behavioral health providers to have this conversation. We really need to take mean safety, reducing access to lethal means out of the ivory tower that it was built in and really bring it down to the average person. And if we go to the next slide, again, this is one of the main reasons why we built this website. We wanted the average person who, again, is supporting themselves, supporting somebody else with these thoughts to say, okay, mean safety is something that I can do. It doesn't have to be this overwhelming, intimidating thing. A lot of people don't even know where to start when it comes to mean safety. So that's one of the main reasons. So when I do my schools training, I talk about this as a tool. What I would hope is that if they're talking with a parent, a guardian, a caregiver, that instead of just generally saying, okay, well, make sure you make the house safe, say, hey, you might not have heard about this, but this can be really effective in keeping this person you care about safe. Why don't you pull up a chair and let's get on this website together? And based on the screening, these are the means or methods that they identify with. So let's talk about how to reduce access to those. So going to the next slide, you'll see that the website features different buckets. So obviously a lot of information on firearms, poisoning and overdose. We also have a section on suffocation and strangulation. And then we'll just call other. So other types of resources. On the next slide, we also have the mean safety checklist. So this is really something we wanted to give people kind of a starting point. Like just imagine, the scenario where you have a family member or a friend and you're trying to figure out, okay, they said something about mean safety, but where do I even start? So we've created the mean safety checklist to say, obviously they're not going to be able to do everything today, but what are the first 10 steps? Once you start taking step 1, it's a lot easier to do step 2. But when you just say kind of, hey, make your house safer, a lot of people don't know where to go. So the mean safety checklist can be downloaded. People can put a picture on their phone. They can download it as a PDF, but want to let you know that that's something out there that we really need to, while we're understanding the why, we really need to understand the what as means matters. That's it. All right, next slide. So one of the strategies that the state especially, and the national does as well, focus on is reducing access to firearms. And that's not reducing access to firearms at all times. I'm a gun owner. I come from a family of law enforcement. I don't know if I hesitate to say gun enthusiast, but we're not talking about reducing firearms or access to firearms overall. We're talking about reducing access to firearms during times of crisis. And so I want to dive into the firearm world a little bit. So we're going to start kind of looking at that. But some of the things the national strategy identifies is partnering with gun shops, working with local firearm instructors as that trusted source. And I would argue also building cultural competency among mental health providers, behavioral health providers, healthcare providers, to be more comfortable having conversations about firearms, because there's a lot of folks in those fields that just have never picked up, never shot firearms. So it's really that cultural competency. If we were going into any other type of culture, we would want to know something before we reach out to them. And I think that's an important part of this. So we're going to have kind of a deep dive into the firearm section. So again, activation warning. If you're a suicide loss survivor by firearms, I do my best to reduce the activation. We are going to kind of get into the weeds here for a second. All right, so I think we're good to go. Actually, sorry, can I have just 10 seconds to grab some water? Sorry, Minnie.
If anyone has any questions, please include them in the chat. We'll make sure to give time for Stan to answer any questions or share any comments that you have. We appreciate you being here today with us.
All right, hey everybody. Sorry, I was rushing around to get on earlier that I forgot to bring my refreshment. And as you know, I've been yapping for 45 minutes now, so I'll try to wrap this up soon. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so on the website, we do have quite a bit of information focused on the firearm. We do have kind of 2 levels. One is for the individual, the firearm owner or somebody supporting a firearm owner. And then the other level is for retailers and ranges. So I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, but we have some hopes that there's going to be some effort around this. I know there's already the mean safety subcommittee, but we're hoping to hopefully tie in some more work there in Riverside in the coming months. But on the website, we kind of go from least severe to most severe or most intense when it comes to firearm risk reduction. And we'll talk more about those as we go. But first, I think it's important that we talk about just kind of some of the research of why we need to focus on firearm suicide reduction. So on the next slide, or over the next couple slides, I want to share a few different studies with you. So next slide. Oh, and sorry, I'm going to type it. It's strivingforsafety.org is the website. Yeah. Hopefully that went out to everybody. All right. So one of the misconceptions when it comes to firearm suicide deaths is that a lot of the research up until about 5 years ago or so kind of insinuated that someone typically the average time of ownership, so when someone purchased a firearm to when they made a suicide attempt, on average was about 7 to 10 years. There was a study done in California a few years ago where they really looked at it and they tracked firearm owners, I think about 12,000 firearm owners over a decade or so, and really looked at, okay, when were these firearms actually being used? And what you see here from the data is that there was, and this is why we have that 10-day waiting period. Again, as a firearm owner, I'm not super hard into this category. I have no problem with people waiting 10 days for a firearm. I think if you need a firearm that badly today, you probably don't need a firearm today. So I totally support the 10-day waiting period, and the evidence even supports that further. What you see, and I'm happy to, I think the link to the studies down there so you can see the charts better if you want. But the highest risk window for getting when purchasing a firearm for suicide is immediately after purchasing that firearm. The day 11 is the highest risk day. Day 12 is a little bit less, day 13. And then there's a, kind of a slow trickle down drop off over time. This is even more prevalent. And I actually, before we move on, so one thing, if you look at the chart, so this line that drops down, I guess you're not seeing my arrow, but the line that drops off, the more solid line, so those are firearm owners. The line up there at the top, the dotted line, is non-firearm owners, but these are all firearm suicide deaths. So we're going to talk more about that in a second, but I just want to be clear that we have not eliminated risk of firearm deaths for non-owners, even though there's a lot of talk about gun safety. So, all right, sorry, on the next slide. Okay, so this is kind of the data part of that line, that drop off. So if we look at it, of the 1,200 deaths that happened over the period of the study that were firearm suicides, you look, again, 1 to 10 days, very low numbers, 11 to 30, 172, 31 to 90. So this is a 20-day period. We had 172. 30 to 90, we had 154, and then from 90 to 365. But really what we saw is the biggest chunk of firearm suicide deaths basically happened within a year of ownership. And I think there's a lot of assumptions we can make about that. I think, gaining access to a firearm builds capability. I've heard people talk about, um, for lack, kind of poetically or lack of a better word, the seductiveness of having access to such a lethal means. Um, that it starts to kind of, be like an earworm that starts to kind of chip away at people. And so, looking at understanding that this is why it's so important to work with gun shops. This is why it's so important to work with firearm instructors, that if someone has had a gun for 20 years, there's not necessarily going to be that itch. There's going to be that comfort that has a different level of capability. Um, but looking at the study, understanding that within that first year, so many people of the 1,200, of those individuals who died within that first year. So it's vital that we work with gun shops. It's vital that we work with firearm instructors. And the data that we're going to share here in just a second shows that it's even more vital, especially with all the things going on. But just to understand that this is not something that, as we used to think, happened years down the road. That first year of ownership is a huge part it needs to be a huge part of our focus when it comes to means safety. All right, next slide, please. So another reason why this is so important, unfortunately, people have better access to gun shops now and firearm safety courses and such. But one of the real fears that the suicide prevention community had is that when it comes to issues of social unrest, or especially during COVID, we saw a huge amount of people buy firearms in 2020 and 2021. But unfortunately, at that time, they weren't able to also there was a lot of gun locks that were sold out. There was gun safes that were sold out. They weren't able to go down to the range and take a firearm safety course. So they were missing out on a lot of these safety mechanisms that are typically in place to reduce access to firearms. Now, we're in 2025, but I would suggest that this is still a big concern. I haven't seen a new update on this, and I'm trying to find it, like where the sales are at. But basically, anytime we have a moment of tragedy or a moment of social unrest, firearm sales go up. Um, Fortunately now, again, gun ranges are open, safety courses are there. Um, but we had a huge influx of firearms into our communities at a time where people didn't have the option to get any of the safety measures put in place. And so there's just an important kind of asterisk to this whole conversation. All right, next slide, please. All right, so a lot of the suicide prevention efforts over the years have been focused on what they call the Gun Shop Project. I was a big supporter of this for over the past decade. It started out in Nami, New Hampshire. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of the laws have changed in California over the last couple of years. So the idea of the Gun Shop Project was that we wanted to inform people that their rights allowed them to go to a gun shop and store that that firearm at a gun shop or a range. A lot of times we'd work with gun shops and offer discounted storage or safer storage. The reality, though, is that that does create a barrier for people because now I have to go into public and now I need to, talk to somebody and get them to store my firearms. Now, the gun shop was not legally required to ask for a reason. I mean, they had like a one, box. What's your reason? You could have just put travel. You didn't have to disclose that it was for risk of suicide for yourself or somebody in your household. But unfortunately, there was a new law that really has kind of removed this as an option. And that new law is that after somebody stores a firearm for 45 days or more, they need to be added to a registry in California. So if I go to a gun shop, because I'm worried that somebody in my household or myself is at risk for suicide, and I bring it to a gun shop, after 45 days, they have to add me to a registry. And firearm owners in general are pretty savvy. And they're also, have a little bit of a big brother mentality. So they're going to have concerns, and that's going to be a barrier to them or restriction to them from storing at a gun shop, even though that's kind of where we're focusing our efforts. What a lot of people don't know, with that being less of an option, is that California has something called a safe harbor law. And Ohio, I think Louisiana, Colorado were some of the first to have a law similar to this. But right now, I'm just going to call on Mindy because we've known each other for a while. So me and Mindy are buddies. You don't actually have to do anything, Mindy. I'm just using you as an example. But thank you for leaning in. So me and Mindy are buddies. She's worried about me. She says, Stan, hey, I know you're going through some stuff. I know you have access to firearms. I know you're having thoughts of suicide. I'm going to come over and I'm going to get your guns. 10 years ago, that would have been illegal. That would have been a felony for her. That would have been a felony for me. The safe harbor law provides an exemption where Mindy now, to reduce risk of suicide, can come over to my house as long as she's not prohibited from owning or possessing firearms, as long as she has a way to store them safely, can come over, take my firearms, and put them in her home until things resolve, until I'm doing better. And so this is what's known as the safe harbor law. Most people, mental health professionals, behavioral health, healthcare, even most firearm owners, most law enforcement agencies don't know that this law is on the book. And me personally, from my own experience, anecdotally, professionally, I really think this is the most applicable way that people are going to get firearms out of their home. Because now all I have to do is talk to one person. I need to talk to one buddy. I've talked with numerous military personnel, first responders, firearm owners, who've actually had to use this for themselves or friends. And it's effective. It's the most effective, the most tangible way to get the guns out of the home. Um, there's a lot of people, and you can poke holes in this or any other suicide prevention strategy and say, well, it's not perfect. Of course, it's not perfect. I mentioned earlier, my family's in law enforcement. I've had law enforcement officers say, oh, well, there's going to be, bad people out there who use this as an excuse for why they have their friends' guns in their home. The reality is, if you have law enforcement coming to your house in general and they find somebody else's guns in your home, why is law enforcement there in the first place? You're probably already engaging in some nefarious stuff. So let's not, in the absence of perfect, not utilize something that we know can be effective. So this is just a really important penal code for us to be aware of. There's some other ones that we're going to talk about in a second, but just getting people to understand that there are rights For as restrictive as California is on gun rights, a lot of people would argue, this is one of the most effective for the work that we do, is understanding that a friend, having that conversation, say, hey, do you have firearms in the home? Where do you keep the firearms in the home? Okay, do you have anyone that you know that could come by and get those guns out of the home? One important, element of that is not just having someone who's not familiar with firearms come to the home to get those guns, making sure that they know how to check that it's unloaded. They have a gun safe, they have gun locks. So you want somebody who's competent around firearms to do that. But I think it's a really important strategy for us to really push this out. And when we get to the materials later, I'll talk more about that. On the next slide, though, there's a few other legislations or mandates in California. One is this is a new one that's pretty exciting, that for someone to get a concealed carry permit, a CCW, they have to go through a minimum of an hour on mental health. So we've been working with some firearm instructors about that. Been working with the DOJ, or the Bureau of Firearms, on improving the certificate test for firearms. Right now, the test, if you're gonna, if you want a firearm, permit, we call it firearm safety card, but firearm permit. It has one question about the lifeline. We're trying to increase more questions about that, understanding that majority, and I don't think I've even mentioned this, 60% of firearm deaths in California and across the country are from suicide, not from homicide. So when we're talking about firearm safety, we should be first and foremost talking about suicide. Also, that the packaging on, anybody out there who's a firearm owner, when you buy a gun, it typically comes in a box. That box needs to include packaging that includes the National Lifeline. We have some stickers that are part of our efforts that we're hoping to roll out there as well, that really promote it, make it more prominent. And then also that all gun shops need to have the National Lifeline in their space. Now, I've worked with a lot of gun shops. In fact, I would say 99% of every gun shop I've ever spoken to about suicide prevention gets on board right away. A lot of times we think that they're going to push back or know that this isn't our issue. The reality is there's no other person who doesn't want people to die by suicide by a firearm as much as a gun shop owner. They, whatever our political leanings, no moral person wants to sell an item to somebody that ends up being used in a suicide. And that's an important part. They are our greatest allies, and we'll talk more about that. So, next slide, please. And actually, I guess I should check. I feel like you guys told me to talk for a long time. But I feel like I've been talking forever. Like, how much time do I have?
I believe have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Okay. You asked for it, just to be clear with everybody. They told me to talk for this long. So I apologize if I'm boring everybody. All right, so a few of the materials available from that previous project I mentioned that we're hoping to be able to bring, but regardless, you have access to. So we created flyers, we created posters that have information for the community. I'm going to share those here with you for a second. We created stickers or decals to put on those boxes for sale, or on gun safes, or transportation devices. We also created training content for use by firearm instructors. So that's something I'm diving back into, is getting firearm instructors as part of that 1 hour, to really emphasize the suicide prevention component of that. So we'll share more about that in a second. So next slide. All right, so here's the flyer that was created. I'm going to kind of dissect it here. We're going to zoom in. I know it's probably hard for you to read on your screen from here. But we've met with a variety of gun owners, gun advocates, first responders, military personnel to create these materials. So there's a few things that we'll dive in specifically about. Obviously, they point to the website, but just wanted you to see them. So the flyer has a back and a front. The poster obviously just has the front. And then additionally, we have the stickers. So if we go to the next slide, we can zoom in a little bit, I hope. Okay, so first, just with some of the materials, some of the things we learned in our stakeholder interviews is be direct, connect gun rights to mental health. Don't make this a message about, again, we're not trying to take away gun rights. We're trying to empower people about their firearm rights. But you do that by protecting you protect your rights through accountability and through responsibility. There's an adage in the firearm community that if you're a hunter, if you're hopping over a fence, you hand your firearm to your buddy once, before you hop over, and then they hand theirs over to you once you're over the fence. So being able to hold on to a firearm is a component of this. So that accountability, that responsibility. On the next slide, we'll go down to a little bit more of that information. We're told that people want to understand the data, tell us why they should care. Most people, especially firearm owners, are not aware the majority of firearm deaths are suicides. A majority or a lot of suicides are completed by firearms. So just painting the picture for them. And really emphasizing this as a responsibility and accountability. If you are going to be a firearm owner, acknowledging that 60% of firearm deaths are suicides, then you need to also be aware of suicide and suicide prevention. So let's not hide this issue behind gun safety. Again, the gun shop owners have been really supportive of that. All right, next slide. On the back, we get into a little bit more information. Actually, if we go ahead and zoom in on the next slide, people wanted a little bit more data. They were really surprised by that 90% of people who survive an attempt will not go on to die by suicide. The majority of people who attempt won't go on to attempt. Also this idea of the protector mentality, that when you ask majority of people who own a firearm, if you ask them, why do you own a firearm? Most of them will say, I own it to protect the people I care about. And so, reframing, what does protection mean? Well, if suicide is the highest, risk, 60% of firearm deaths are suicides, then when we're talking about protection, we need to be talking about ourselves. We need to be talking about our own access to mental health, and that if I'm going to protect my family, I need to also protect them from the risk of suicide, not just from kind of these kind of amorphous outside threat ideas. So really reframe that idea of protection. We also wanted to make sure they were clear and push back against that won't people find another way, like we talked about. On the next slide, on the bottom half, you'll see we actually give them those strategies. So we talk about protecting those rights. So we give them information on the penal code exemption for the safe harbor law. We do address, the possibility of storing it at a gun shop, even though we've addressed kind of some of the limitations of that. And then most importantly, just to talk. One of the things I hope to do with this whole effort is to not wait till people have a crisis to have a conversation, but as soon as people own a firearm. Like, I want it to be normalized in the firearm community that I want the average person who owns a firearm to know that they should talk to their friends now and say, hey, if you ever have some issues where you're having these thoughts, I'm willing to hold on to your guns, and will you offer me the same? And I want that to happen in a moment of non-crisis, so that if a moment of crisis ever does arise, there's less barriers. There's less, the conversation's already happened. Hey, we talked about this. Will you do this for me? So we want to encourage people to talk. And of course, we also want to give people the lifeline. So I just want to talk you through with some of the, kind of what's on there. There's some things that we learned from the firearm community that I'll save for another day. But for now, I just want to let you know that these materials are out there. Again, we have the flyer, which is the front and back, the poster. I believe your subcommittee already has some materials as well. But hopefully we're hoping to integrate this. We're hoping to integrate some of the cultural competency trainings, just general trainings about mean safety and how to have a conversation about this. All right, so over the next few slides, we're just going to breeze through some of the other categories of means reduction. So on the website, this is another issue, or another category that we speak to, strangulation, suffocation. If you go to the next slide, the reality, and this is unfortunate, there are some work groups out there. The data shows us over the past decade or so that hanging and suffocation has actually increased as a mechanism for suicide over the last few years. And there are kind of few things that in your home you can do to reduce that risk. The reality is, if that is somebody's suicide image or somebody's kind of chosen path, unfortunately, they probably need a little bit more intensive care because it's so hard to monitor for that. I've gotten on, my pedestal a few times and said that we need to make, in a hospital setting, they have breakaway sinks and breakaway door handles and breakaway doors and tearaway shower curtains. I personally think that we as a public need to demand that those things become more accessible for the average home. Just going back to like a school setting, working with the youth and them saying, this is their chosen method. I would love for us to be able to, get grants and say, hey, here's a $300 gift card to go down to Home Depot and buy a new door and buy a new door handle, buy a new sink and buy new shower curtains. We're not quite there, but that's something I would love to see. But the reality at the moment is that if this is somebody's chosen mean or method, we probably do need to be a little bit more intensive with our response to them. Moving down from there, another section on the website we talk about is poison and overdose. If we go to the next slide, it talks about some of the different elements of that. So just, I think in our conversations when we're talking to the caregiver or the individual, understanding that this is where the nuance of messaging is important. A lot of times we say prescriptions. It's not just prescriptions. There are some over-the-counter medications that are extremely lethal, and I'm not going to identify them here. Those of you who know. But we need to be much more careful about not just framing this as prescriptions, helping people understand that if you have a safe, if you have a locked closet, that those medications need to be there. Again, not just the prescriptions, the over-the-counter ones as well. And also, not to go into details, but chemicals and such, these are all things, because I think a lot of times we immediately go to those prescriptions. There's a lot of other things that people have utilized. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but because of that miscommunication, a lot of people whose attempts are non-lethal end up with lifelong injuries because of the chemicals that they use. So we need to be more robust in saying what we need to be restricting access to, I guess would be the way that I'd say it. All right, moving down from there, this is why focusing on, prescription disposals, drug disposals, drug drop-offs, whatever you want to call it, educating people to get rid of those pills, not just flushing them down the toilet. Most law enforcement departments at each subdivision have a safe place for disposal. Most hospitals have them, most healthcare, spaces. And then on the next slide too, I mentioned this briefly previously, but I've done a lot of work with pharmacists over the years to really, again, empower them as the most accessible healthcare provider in our communities, to be aware of suicide and the role that they can play. So if we skip over, and actually you can skip 2 slides on this one. Another section of the website is around kind of other efforts. So if we skip down from there, a lot of people don't always understand that or are aware that there's a lot of research that's gone into other aspects of suicide prevention. So, the organization behind building parking structures has a toolkit on, hey, if you're building a parking structure, here's some things you should do to reduce suicide. There's railway efforts, there's bridge efforts, which has gotten more media attention over the years. So as we kind of skip through the next few slides, we'll see that. So there's a lot of work that's been done regarding bridge safety. The Golden Gate Barrier has been completed. The Coronado Bridge in San Diego. So these are number 1 and number 2 sites in California for suicides. The construction is about to begin on the Coronado Bridge down in San Diego County, which is phenomenal. And so there's more and more awareness of how, as a community, and I know you've had some issues between San Bernardino and Riverside of some, more prominent public suicides. So more and more, we're starting to normalize. If we're building a structure, we need to have suicide prevention as a key component of what we're doing. So with that, I think we can kind of skip through the rest of the slides. It's just there's some toolkits on railway safety, which a lot of people don't know, and then just kind of messaging, which means safety messaging, which we can talk about. So with that, if we go one more slide, you'll see my email address. Most everybody that's part of the coalition knows how to get a hold of me as well. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. I have been yapping too much. So yeah, if you go to the last slide, I think
I don't think we have that slide, Stan.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we can drop it in the chat.
Yeah, we'll just drop it in the chat then.
Okay.
But yeah, so we can go ahead and stop on the sharing. I think maybe we have a few minutes left for discussion. But yeah, so I'll drop my email in the chat. And again, Mindy, Rebecca, Anna Marie, a bunch of
I
people.
found it. Sorry, there it is.
Aha.
It was after the Q&A slide, so.
Okay. That's that. The one asterisk I'll share when posting my email there. Please do not email me if you or someone you know is in crisis. Please contact 988 or another resource. As Mindy and Rebecca will absolutely confirm, I suck at email. So do not email if you or someone you know is in crisis. Please reach out to a resource that will get back to you immediately, so you can get that support. But hopefully, I told you my goals for today. We're building a base understanding of why we should be doing what is mean safety, why we should be doing mean safety, and then talking to you about some of these aspects. Hopefully, making you a little bit more comfortable to have that conversation and be thinking about whatever your role is, whatever industry or agency you work with. What are some of the ways that we can do a better job of bringing mean safety into what we do? Because again, I just think it's a big gap that we have in suicide prevention, that there aren't more people willing to have that conversation with their client, with a friend, with a family member. So I hope you're walking away a little bit more informed about the topic. And again, we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much, Stan, for sharing all of this really important information. There are a few questions here. I think we had one regarding if a family member decides to turn a firearm into law enforcement, are they able to get it back after the threat is over?
So that one is a bit tricky, and it really depends on the agency that you're working with. Smaller agencies typically have more leeway. Um, the okay, so the situation is I am concerned about a family member, or let's just say friend, who is thinking about suicide. If I turn it over, the reality is you likely will not get that firearm back. Some agencies will work with you in storage, but I do want to be clear that most of the time you will not get that firearm back. So that's why storing it yourself or storing it at a gun shop, even if it gets added to the registry, you do have to be the owner of the firearm to go to a gun shop and have it stored, though. So you cannot take it for somebody else without them being present, which is another barrier to that. Because obviously, we don't want someone, or we would prefer someone who's having thoughts of suicide to not have to handle the actual firearm. We don't want to give them like, hey, you have to take this thing that could be the end of you to the place. But um, it gets tricky, especially with second parties or third parties taking it, because um, just from the enforcement perspective, what I most often hear is that's going to automatically signal a welfare check. And so now law enforcement is going to be involved. Now they're going to have to go to that person's house and check on that person for their own liability, which I'm not saying I do or don't agree with, but I understand their reasoning for that. Because if they got a firearm and someone said, hey, this person's thinking about hurting themselves, and they didn't go check, now they are partially liable for that. So from what I hear, um, it's gonna create a whole nother world of circumstances, but B, you probably will not get that firearm back.
Thank you, Stan.
Yeah.
I think there's just there were some comments about making sure not to dispose of medication, like flush it down in our plumbing system because it can hurt ocean animals. They want folks to find a prescription drop box. And someone gave a
I
link.
totally agree with that. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear that that's the reason why you shouldn't do it.
Thanks.
Otters and dolphins are awesome, so be nice to them.
And then we also have, what about suicide by cop? Is this included in the statistics?
So that one's tricky. It's typically not. There are medical examiners who are more savvy in this space, may look at the narrative of all the circumstances and determine that, oh, this was not it's still an officer involved shooting, but it was not a homicide by an officer. It can be deemed a suicide. It's very unlikely for that to be the case. there has to be a lot of information to suggest that, and it's ultimately would be under the determination. But I guess to answer the bigger question is, does that get counted in overall suicide data? No. There's a lot of suicides. I would argue suicides are largely underreported, even though our data is getting a lot better. I had the opportunity to meet the former Surgeon General a few years back, and he mentioned that he believes more than 50% of single car accidents are suicide related. So there's a lot of suicides that don't get reported as suicides, and that's not to scare people to say, oh, the numbers are so much higher. But I do think it's an acknowledgement of the limitations of data. I think you could also argue that many things to get classified as overdoses or accidental overdoses likely have some suicide intent behind them. So, in my opinion, numbers of suicide, whether suicide by cop or the other mechanisms I discussed, are always going to be underreported.
Thank you, Stan. We also have a hand raised by Kathy. Kathy, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, so you kind of answered my question for the first part. So what happens if the family member takes the gun to a friend or another person's home, and let's say she's worried about her husband finding out where the gun is at, and then him wanting to go to that person's house to go retrieve it? How do you navigate that?
That's a great question. I mean, first off, I think my hope would be going back to this idea of let's talk about it now. I'll be open with the group. I think some of you might have been at the conference a couple years ago. I went through a situation where I was struggling. So I went to a family member and I said, hey, I'm having a hard time. Do you mind holding on to these for a while? So there was an agreement made between me and that person. And so that's the ideal situation, is that there's communication that occurs ahead of time, that if something were to ever happen. As far as taking the firearms away from the situation you're describing is a little bit more, I'm taking these firearms away and it's almost like this person doesn't know or support that. That is not what the law necessarily allows, because now you are technically committing a robbery of that person. Even though it's for their own good, they need to be voluntarily supporting that process. So rather than being deceptive of, and I'm not saying it's a morally wrong thing to do if you need it to happen, but now you are getting into some legal issues. So what we want more than anything is for that person voluntarily say, yeah, you're right, I'm not safe, we need to give this to a person. Now, did that kind of make sense on that end of it?
Yeah.
So that part is one of those where, like, if that person's not supportive of you taking away your firearms, it's a whole hornet's nest. In that case, you probably do want to bring it to law enforcement, because that means that person is not voluntarily giving up their firearms, which is really the effort behind the firearm stuff that I was doing and talking about, is getting people to understand that to be accountable, to be responsible, and then to protect their rights, the best thing that they can do is voluntarily transfer their firearms to a friend or a family member. In the situation you're describing, you're either looking at, a red flag law, gun violence restraining order, engaging law enforcement, which is inevitably going to take away that, or at least reduce for a period of time, that person's right to access firearms. So it's always best to have the person on board. If they're not on board with it, then it would be a better mechanism would be to go the gun violence restraining order, so that law enforcement is involved from the start. Because that creates a whole nother set of circumstances.
I mean, I have CPS involved, so that's where I'm just trying to avoid.
Yeah. And you have my email if you want to send me an email. We can chat if it's about a specific situation. But if the person is not voluntarily or willing to give up those firearms to a friend or family member under the safe harbor, I would be looking at gun violence restraining order or getting law enforcement involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And then someone's just asking about means, sharing that. Thank you for this wonderful info about means, but I didn't see data about kids in the home using adults' firearms.
So the good news is that while firearm safety in general maybe hasn't improved as much as we should, we wanted to, the PSAs from the 90s and the early 2000s and 80s about kids getting access to firearms. Youth have a lot less access to firearms, especially in California, than the common expectation. Firearms are used in very few numbers of youth suicides. Obviously, that data doesn't track when we look at school, threats to schools and school violence. But regarding suicides, well, most of the data shows us is that firearms are very rarely used. And that's one of the spaces where people do take actions around firearms. When a youth is experiencing thoughts of suicide, that is one kind of situation where adults are really good at restricting access. Um, so I'm sure we have data. I'm confident that Riverside has the data in your community about youth broken down by means. I can, pretty confidently say that firearms are probably the lowest category of mechanism used for youth suicides, although it does occur. But that is one area where the average person has common sense and knows that if a youth is thinking about suicide, we need to remove access to that means. The majority of firearm suicides are happening in the middle-aged category, middle-aged, older adult, especially among the male population.
Thank you, Stan.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it looks like those are all the questions, comments that we have. Again,
Sorry, real quick. There was one that was just direct to me, and there was a question about in the coming months in the county if there will be offering any mental health first aid. And I wanted to just share, yes. So we do have open community trainings. I know we have an adult and a youth mental health first aid coming up in September, especially for Suicide Prevention Month. And I asked that if somebody from our team can drop the registration link for our Google form for those upcoming open trainings, because I can't access my web browser. So someone could do that just in response to the question that was asked.
great. Thank you, Mindy.
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, and actually, sorry, there was one other question I think we skipped over earlier. So the safe harbor, and they asked how long, who's in charge of how long that loan duration is. So for safe harbor, if it's among friends and family, the language in the law says for a time that is reasonably necessary. So it's not specifically defined. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 years. So there's a lot of leniency in that language.
Thank you. Okay, so I know we are coming up to the end of our meeting today, but we are going to, we don't want to just end here, even though we've learned so much today, but we also have some additional information and resources that we want to share with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Downs, who is supporting our intervention subcommittee, and she's going to share a bit about some of the work that they've done.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Stan, for all this great information. So the intervention subcommittee has been doing a lot of work, and thank you especially to Brianna Green and Kelly Smith, who have done the work, and they're here in this picture. They're amazing. They served as our chair for, I think, over a year. They have stepped down, so I sadly have to announce those news, but I also give her a lot of kudos for the work they did. So some of the updates from the last quarter is the continue to the firearm lock initiative. You can see the gun lock here in the picture. And this has been a partnership with Medical Center, with Kelly and the Vet Center to promote safety. And but the last estimate we have is about 3,300 gun locks distributed in the community in different outreach events and other opportunities. So that is really great. And then Kelly and Brianna were always exploring new ways to do this. And so there were other trying to establish other collaboratives, like meeting with all the clinic managers and supervisors for RUHS, behavioral health, to present the subcommittee's efforts and initiatives, trying to get more of these collaborative working ideas, how to keep going and keep promoting the mean safety, reaching new audiences. We also met, that was me as well, with the Engaging Schools Subcommittee and presenting, what we were doing, the efforts, and trying to figure out also to reach out, schools and whatnot. As always, there's, opportunities and challenges. And so those are some of the things that we have faced is not enough people in the subcommittee. And so if anyone is interested, please join us. That will be great, especially with all this information that Stan shared today. Hopefully there's some renewed interest in this work, because that has been one of the challenges in the intervention subcommittee is that there's not a lot of engagement from the community or other members. So there's a lot of work done that, mostly by Brianna and Kelly did. And then, tried to do the support here from our RUHS office. But we need more people in the community who are willing to join us and continue the efforts of promoting mean safety. And so that would be great. And if anyone could just drop the link on the website where people can show interest, that would be great. I don't have it available right now, but it's it's the work that we've been doing and just trying to explore different options to continue this. So if anyone here in the audience is interested in learning more about these efforts or ways to collaborate where we can provide more of this information, that would be wonderful. And I'm trying to find the link at the same time that I'm talking. But yeah, anybody has any questions about this update or, oh, thank you, Annie. Thank you. Anybody questions about the subcommittee efforts or the update for me?
Thank you, Michelle, for talking about that. This is Kelly. Stan, we had engaged before, I think last year, about really trying to get engaged the gun store owners, the CCW instructors and stuff like that. We'd love to revisit that idea if you're interested and see if we can get some more boots on the ground and get this information out there to the gun shops.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to be done. And we are happy and thrilled to do it. We just need more people to join us in this effort and being willing to put the effort and explore opportunities. And that's all my update.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing. And yes, if anyone's interested, we would love to have you join our intervention subcommittee. Please just take a look at the link that Annie has shared in the chat for us. And I think what we move on next is just some final updates on some upcoming events, and we will close out. So Annie is going to share some things that we have for you.
Hi, everybody. Hope you guys all enjoyed today's discussion. If you guys want to get more information and further training on suicide prevention, we encourage you to take advantage of free learning opportunities that we are offering through PEI. One of them is Know the Signs. It's a 2-hour training that helps attendees learn the basics of suicide prevention, knowing the signs, finding the words, reaching out to support, and connecting individuals to resources. And this training is offered virtually currently every month. But if you or your organization, anybody wants to get trained, we can offer it in person as well. Just go ahead and reach out to that email listed, or you can call. We also offer Safe Talk. It's a 3 to 4 hour training, and it's to learn about suicide alertness and how you can connect someone with thoughts of suicide to resources. And then we also have Assist. It's applied suicide intervention skills training. It's an in-person 2-day full training, and you learn interventions that you can use with someone who is having active thoughts of suicide and to help keep them safe for now. So go ahead and please scan the QR code if you're interested in getting trained. And then next slide, please. And then we want to go ahead and take the opportunity to share some save the dates with you. We are partnering again with AFSP, yeah, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And we have our Out of Darkness walks. We have the Riverside Walk, which is October 4th at Fairmont Park. And then we have the Coachella Valley Walk, which is October 25th in Palm Desert Civic Center Park. If you scan the QR code, join our team. It's Rivco Suicide Prevention. We are giving away t-shirts, team t-shirts. It's a great event. Come out, share. People have a really great time, and there's a lot of stigma reduction and awareness raised at these events. And then we also have the international, Survivors of Suicide Lost Day. It's in November. We have more information to come regarding that. And then next slide, we have one more save the date for you guys. It is for our 4th annual Suicide Prevention Coalition Conference. It is Thursday, October 2nd. It is from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. full day. It will be at the Palm Springs Civic Center. I'm sorry, not Civic Center, Palm Springs Convention Center. So go ahead and scan the QR code. You are able to register now. And it's a full day full of learning, and it's a great event. And then next slide. So just in closing, we want to go ahead and share our website again, www.rivcospc.org. You can get today's recording along with previous recordings. You can get upcoming event information, join a subcommittee, get trained. There's all kinds of resources listed, a lot of great things on the website. So we encourage you again to join one of our 8 subcommittees. And then one last thing is we ask if you enjoyed today's presentation, we just ask that you take a brief survey. I'll go ahead and share the link in the chat. And then we also have a QR code available there for you. And we just encourage everyone to share their feedback. That way we can improve and get better every presentation. So thank you guys again for joining us. I don't know if anyone else has some final words.
Thank you all so much for joining today's meeting. We appreciate your time, your attention, and your questions and comments. Again, looking forward to having you join us at these upcoming events. And if you can, please complete our survey. Really great opportunity to share maybe some future topics that you may be interested in. It's always good for us to know what areas of that you would like to learn more information about in regards to suicide. So again, thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
And just one last thing, again, it was a heavy topic today. So as I said, please take care of yourselves. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you all.